Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps I take from my bed to the floor. 5, 6, 7, 8. Will today be rough or will today be great? 9, 10, 11, 12. Lately I've been going through hell. 13, 14, 15, 16. Today's the day. Are you coming? Are you sick of being normal? I'm sick of being average. I'm sick of being mortal. I'm about to be a savage. I see a lot of things that I want, I will have them. I got a new mindset that I just established. I'll march through the cold with the nails on the pavement. I'll shovel that coal just to get out the basement. My story will be told, helping others make changes. I'll be so bold they will watch in amazement.
Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it.
Foot up on the pedal, pushing hard to the metal. Make a deal with the devil. Channel rage through my vessel into something that is special. Energy of a rebel, going up a level. I just wanna be greatness. I could feel changes, turn a new page and tie up my laces. I will be the bravest, break out of my cages. I will not be nameless, I will not be aimless.
Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it.
Changes, turn a new page and tie up my laces. I will be the bravest, break out of my cages. I will not be nameless, I will not be aimless.
Face it, am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over? I keep waiting. Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start over?
Okay. How y'all doing? We're going to be doing some Gavin Ortland tonight. We're going to be responding to a little bit of Gav, a little bit of Trent Horney, and just a touch of Shameless Joe. All right, so let's get to it, shall we? Let's make sure everything's set up good. We're going to get all this faster and better. Here we go. Alright, hopefully y'all can hear me just fine. I'm going to bring up the gain just a little bit, guys. Just a few more decibels. How's everyone today? Okay, that's in the yellow. We're in the yellow? We are in the yellow. Okay, so let's start. Here we go.
Papacy. I've done lots of debate on this topic, lots of videos on it, written a chapter about it in my book. I'm drawing from all of that. I've never compiled it all together. So this won't be a ton of new information, although actually it will probably for most people because very few people probably sort of looked at all the different things. So this is my one-stop shop, putting all my work in on this topic into squeezing it down. Not everything. Short, trying to make it short. But just basically explaining a Protestant perspective. Why don't we accept the papacy? The goal is not to attack Roman Catholics at a personal level. I know it's hard to hear your views criticized. I really appreciate having Roman Catholic viewers, and I strive to maintain positive interpersonal relationships with individual Roman Catholics. I have lots of Catholic friends. But at the same time, Protestants are allowed to explain their beliefs. We're allowed to critically evaluate the claims of alternative views and traditions and just explain. I sometimes get the sense people are surprised when Protestants argue for Protestantism and they're getting offended and angry and so forth. And, of course, we're allowed to do the exact same thing that they're doing against us. We're just, argue for what we believe is true, especially when there's so much at stake. The papacy.
Okay, so there's a lot there that I don't like. Let's start off with him calling us Roman Catholics. We're just Catholic. Just Catholic. Number two. Okay, so someone's commenting on Keck. I can't see your comments. Number two. He's coming off very defensive and very childish. And then he does I have a black friend. You know what I mean? Like, I have a Catholic friend. So what? All right, let's move on to the 5-minute mark.
Gives us a lot of information. It's reasonable to expect that if there was this supreme office over the church, it'd probably come up somewhere, if not in the New Testament, at least in the surrounding literature outside of the New Testament in the 1st century and then going into the 2nd century. Somewhere you're going to get an echo of this. You're going to get some consequence from this if it's actually true historically that there is a Petrine office over the church. We learn a lot about the offices of the church in the New Testament. You just consider in the pastoral epistles, for example, all that you learn about presbyters and deacons and these qualifications lists, multiple qualifications lists, lots of other information about the need to pay them and how many witnesses are needed to bring a charge before them and on and on and on. There's lots of information about the offices of the church in the New Testament. Almost, presbyters are mentioned or referenced or alluded to in almost every book, starting with Acts, all over Acts, you get elders in churches, and then moving forward, almost every other book of the New Testament.
So I think it's ironic that Gavin doesn't realize how much of what he's saying is actually working against his argument and proving the Catholic case. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why Gavin is so clueless on this. I've said it in a few places, and I don't mean it insultingly. I think he has bad reading comprehension. And I think Ferris of How to Be Christian has pointed this out more than a few times. It's like Protestants are taught how not to read. It's really weird. I remember an experience I had with a friend of mine named Tony, where we were exploring different denominations, and out of nowhere, why is this unplugged and what is this connected to? Out of nowhere, this group that was trying to convert us started chopping up sentences and putting different verses from the Old Testament to the New Testament together to make a new sentence. They're like, see what it says? And I'm like, that's not how reading works. You know what I mean? Like, it was bizarre. I don't know what's going on with Protestants on that front. So here you go.
The papacy. So, for example, Vatican I stipulates that both clergy and faithful of whatever right and dignity, both singly and collectively, are bound to submit to this power by the duty of hierarchical subordination and true obedience. So you see there the word obedience and the words hierarchical subordination, okay? This is the claim here is this guy is the head honcho. He is the boss. Even if it's cast as a servant leadership, okay, Gregory the Great calls the papacy authority invested in this one person over the rest of the church. This is the idea of papal supremacy, and the concern and the nature of this authority is not just matters of faith and morals, but the discipline and government of the church as well. And that is not what we see about Peter in the New Testament. The other apostles don't relate to Peter by the duty of hierarchical subordination and true obedience. And I think this point is widely recognized in the early church, even after the Roman See has come to be associated with Peter's authority. So in the mid-3rd century, for example, you have Stephen, the Bishop of Rome, making this claim. This is around the time you're getting this idea of a unique Petrine office. Earlier with Irenaeus, he's thinking of both Peter and Paul together as founding the Church of Rome. In the 3rd century, you're getting this idea of a specifically Petrine authority associated with Rome. But even from here going forward, you don't have this idea that this bishop has authority over all the others. That is not characteristic of even once that idea does come in. So in other words, once you get the idea of a Petrine office, it's not functioning with this kind of supremacy. Cyprian of Carthage, whom I'll talk about later, very clear on this point. He articulates this specifically in response to Stephen.
Okay, so these are really bad points. I'm not even sure where to begin on this. I mean, Vatican, Vatican One, for some reason, and when you read uh, is it the Augsburg Confession? Yeah, when you read the Augsburg Confession, uh, they're talking against Trent, and they don't seem to understand what Trent is saying. Like they just don't understand at all. And it's the same thing here at the Vatican One. They just don't understand what's being said, and I don't understand how they can't get the plain meaning of the text. Like the Protestants' whole thing is the plain meaning of the text when it comes to the Bible, and yet when it comes to every other piece of literature, they seem inept at literacy. Like it's bizarre to me, and I don't know if it's intentional. I don't know if it's bad faith, or I don't know if they really just something in the formula of how they're taught how to read through the Bible makes it hard for them to understand metaphor, analogy, generalization, um, just figures of speech. Like all that stuff just falls out of their head, and like they just can't get it, and I don't understand why. Some of the greatest writers in the world are Protestant, so how are these Protestant pastors so bad at literature, at reading comprehension? Let's move on.
Sola Scriptura, all these things that if you just think about it, it's like, no, I'm just looking at the data and saying, is this true? Did Jesus institute this office, or did the apostles envision this? Is this historically plausible? Just looking at the data, working through it, saying, doesn't look like it. And on this point with Acts 15, people will typically say, well, Peter had such an authority, he simply didn't exercise it here. To which I would respond by saying, okay, fine. Where does he? Where in the New Testament do we find this office? To the extent that Peter exhorts others in the church, he doesn't appeal to a unique authority, but a common one. I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder, 1 Peter 5:1. You can say, okay, yeah, but he's still not appealing to his authority there. Fine, sure. Where does he? See, this is the problem, is there's a vacuum here at the very foundation. There's no foundation for this idea. The most commonly appealed to passage, of course, is Matthew 16.
An argument from silence is not an argument. So I just finished writing an article for Substack, and I will be working on the scripted version of this article for a video. Where I deal with this passage. It has to do with the Bishop of Canterbury. And I'm talking about the Petra distinction. It's not really something that's come up in this conversation, but I think it's a very good conversation to have when it comes to the legitimacy of the Pope. Is what's being said there. What's the linguistic shift that's happening, and why does it matter theologically? So, I think Gavin is missing the trees for the forest, or the forest for the trees. And I'm not sure why. To me, and to many Christians, it sounds like bad faith. To many atheists, it sounds like bad faith. But I would assume from Gavin it's not bad faith, that he's being honest. But I don't see the honesty here. I just see it's like he has blinders on, covering over a blindfold. You know what I mean? Like I don't get this.
Related to Paul by the duty of hierarchical subordination. And you said, where do you get that? I don't see that in the New Testament. And I said, well, for 2 Corinthians 11:28, Paul says he has a care for all the churches. Well, you would rightly object to that, and you'd protest, and you'd say, wait a second, that's not what the verse says.
Okay, so the idea of Peter and Paul being the founders of the church is not an un-Catholic thought. So whatever Gavin thinks he's proving is moot. The Catholics believe Catholics believe that Peter and Paul founded the church. It just happens to be the seat of St. Peter. Peter founded two big churches, Antioch and Rome. Not both of them are the headship of the Pope of the church. It isn't just simply that it's Peter. It's that it's Peter and Paul. So, whatever you think you're proving, you're not proving anything. You're just making a Catholic argument that just isn't used anymore, but is still a beautiful argument that I happen to agree with, and a lot of Catholics happen to agree with. Just because not all Catholics know the history doesn't mean that the argument's not still a good argument. You're not disproving the Catholic Church by saying, hey, Paul might have had a part in this foundation. You're strengthening the foundation of the Catholic Church. Yeah, let's move on.
And it's almost hard to argue against, because there's just not even there's not even a lot of data to draw from. Like, where's the ex cathedra statement in the early church? Well, again, people are going to say, well, it develops. Okay, if this office was given to the church for the purported reasons that it is needed, then when you have these raging controversies like Arianism and so forth, don't you think this would kind of come up somewhere? I mean, it sort of strains plausibility that it's just going to sort of go into hiding for the first 700 years of its existence and not be exercised, right? So I'm trying to push against the overworking of doctrinal development in an implausible way. One of the ways you can see the historical development of the papacy and the concerns about something like papal infallibility, but also papal supremacy, I'll cover both of those here, is just by looking at the pushback within the Roman Catholic Church around the time of Vatican I, leading up to Vatican I, and even after. Johann Dollinger, for example, he's a 19th century Catholic theologian. I'll put his full name up on the screen and his dates. He was excommunicated because he rejected papal infallibility, and this was very scandalous because prior to Vatican I, he had been a leading Catholic historian, and his basis for opposition to papal infallibility was mainly historical. He said in a letter, "We are still waiting the explanation of how it is that until 1830 years had passed, the Church did not formulate into an article of faith a doctrine which the Pope calls the very foundation principle of Catholic faith and doctrine." He also basically said this is just, plainly opposed to the practice of the early Church. The idea that you're going to locate infallibility in one person in the terms of Vatican I. He's saying that's just not what we see in the early church. That's not what the historical data supports. Late in his life, he's responding to an appeal to save his soul from the everlasting consequences of exclusion from the church, and he's explaining why he can't sort of sacrifice his intellect on such a question. Quote, "If I did so..." Clement, this is perhaps the most significant extra-biblical first-century testimony, and because it's claimed to be written by the fourth pope, although these early lists don't agree. So there's ambiguity about how you order things, but nonetheless, Clement of Rome is regarded to be one of the early popes. And so people say, look, Clement wrote this epistle to the Corinthian church, thus papal supremacy. But you could just as easily argue for Antiochian supremacy when Ignatius is writing letters to other churches, and so many other examples of this as well. If you look at it with a critical eye, you can just see, oh yeah, you're stretching to get from the actual data to the desired outcome. There's this pivot that takes place. And if you just read Clement's letter, it strongly confirms the claim that the apostles supported two offices in the church. That is what he plainly says, and he regards bishops and deacons, two offices, as the fulfillment of prophecy. And he uses the term bishop and presbyter interchangeably. And on multiple occasions, he always refers to the leadership in the church in Corinth in the plural, for example. So this confirms the picture we get from the New Testament and from the Didache, another important first.
So, as someone who's read the Didache, I gotta say, I don't agree with Gavin's take here at all. I think the Didache gravitates toward the Catholic reading, Catholic understanding, and is a good proof text for Catholic tradition.
Data just doesn't hold up to this. Papal infallibility, for example, I mean, the only discussion in the scholarship about papal infallibility.
It just seems like Gavin's definition of papal infallibility and the papal office is much higher than what the papal office says of itself. And I've noticed this in Protestant writings, whether it's Luther, whether it's the Augsburg Confessions, whether it's any of the other confessions. The 39 Articles, Tort, or whatever it's called. Whenever they're talking about the Catholic Church, they have a higher estimation claim about ourselves. It's a weird conundrum. And for those who are hopping in late, I understand that I did not announce this show. Announcements will start happening. My PA is supposed to be doing that, but she's a little distracted. But we're trying to get onto task. We're trying to make sure that the prep work is working for the show. We are trying to make sure that announcements are going out, links are going out. I know there's a bunch of you guys that like to watch at 10:30 in the morning. I know that you guys want to know when I'm posting, and it just seems kind of random right now. I'm trying to work things out. There's also some other people involved, so it's going to get there.
Having recounted Vigilius's refusal to appear at their council, they declare that since therefore he has acted in this way, we have pronounced that his name is alien to Christians and is not to be read out in the sacred diptychs. So the reasoning here from the bishops is, their authority, if you read through their rationale for this, they're basically saying we have authority greater than him. Here's how one Roman Catholic historian puts it. Constantinople II not only condemned those 3 chapters, but even excommunicated the Pope. This was a rather unique case of an ecumenical council setting itself clearly against the Pope and yet not suffering the fate of Ephesus II.
Single bishop until perhaps sometime in the early 2nd century. And now I should say at the welcome back to Shameless Popery.
All right, so now we're going to get to counter argument number 1, and then we'll get to counter argument number 2. Let's go.
I'm Joe Heschmeyer, and Dr. Gavin Ortling just released a video titled "The Papacy is Not from God" that I think warrants a reply. Now, I should say at the outset, I respect the bluntness of his argument, and I hope that he won't be offended if I answer him in an equally straightforward manner. And second, I think he's focused on exactly the right question. As I said in my book, Pope Peter, if the doctrine of the papacy is true, everyone should be Catholic. If the doctrine of the papacy is false, no one should be Catholic. So I want to applaud him for asking the right question, even if, obviously, I disagree with his conclusions. And I also want to make clear up front that I'm not going to try to answer every single argument he makes. I've laid out the arguments for Peter having a papal-type role in my book, Pope Peter. I've looked at the history of bishops in the early church in my book.
I'm probably going to review his book, Pope Peter, after I get done with Kip Davis's book. By the way, Kip's book is right there, okay? So don't think I've stopped reading it. I have stopped reading the Book of Mormon because it was too bullshitty. Sorry, it just was too... It was too unbelievable. I couldn't do it. If you're a Mormon and you want to help me read through the Book of Mormon, I greatly appreciate it because I couldn't buy into it. It was boring and it was not for me. So someone who's, and I read this kind of thing, and it wasn't for me. So if you're a Mormon and you want to help me read through the Book of Mormon, I am down. Okay.
The early church was a Catholic church, so you can check out those for more, but I want to focus on just one part of his argument, the idea that there was no Bishop of Rome in the early church. So the argument goes, the Bishop of Rome couldn't have been the Pope early on because there wasn't a Bishop of Rome early on until perhaps sometime in the early 2nd century.
So the first point here is that in the earliest times...
I'm not proving the papacy true. Plenty of Orthodox, even Anglicans and Lutherans, might agree with me here without accepting the Catholic claims about the papacy. But I do think it'll move the conversation in the right direction if we can at least take the worst arguments off the table. Speaking of tables, special thanks to everyone who supports this channel, shamelessjoe.com. So I have no idea what we would have done otherwise. So thank you again to Rome early on. And how well does all that evidence hold up? I think the easiest way to tell the story is to go chronologically, starting with the oldest sources first. While there's some controversy on the precise dating of ancient works, the oldest extra-biblical work that Gavin cites to is probably the Didache. He mentions it only briefly, but he claims that it teaches that there are only 2 offices in the church.
So this confirmed...
My preferred translation of the Didache is the one from Bart Ehrman. I think he's a really good translator, actually.
His point, as Oxford's David Downes explains, the Ecclesia and the Didache has teachers, apostles, prophets, bishops, and deacons. And the text never really explains what these roles are or how they might differ from one another. So it's led to ongoing debate. There is simply no scholarly consensus on what the Didache is trying to tell us about the organizational structure of the church. This is literally a fight that's been going on since the publication of the Didache in 1883 after it was discovered from ancient writings. But from what I can tell, there seems to be 4 or 5 offices, and it's not entirely clear from the text which of these might be itinerant, temporary, which ones are local, permanent, and you can see this all for yourself. You don't need to take my word for it. In chapter 11, we're told how to treat teachers, apostles, and prophets. Chapter 13 talks about the need to financially support true teachers and prophets and how to tell them apart from false teachers and false prophets. So you might be wondering how Gavin can say that the Didache only mentions 2 offices when it seems to mention 5. The only proof offered in his video is the line, "Appoint for yourselves bishops and deacons worthy of the Lord," from chapter 15. Now, the text is presented on screen as the end of a sentence, ending with a period. But if you check his source, you'll see that that's simply not true. The line has been altered.
So this is a problem with Gavin that I've seen a lot with Gavin. So I will get into my issues with Heschmeyer in just a second. Gavin is really bad at his citations, and he's really, really bad at closing off quotes without pointing out that he's closing off quotes. So in my writing, what I like to do is I like to bracket when I'm adding material, and I also like to parentheses off any extra commentary of like, hey, this is part of a longer sentence, this is that, and then cite where it's from. But when I do a quote and I'm going to cut it off, I like to do the three little dots. I know that's out of style. I don't really care. I'm not writing for college. I'm not writing for Chicago style or for AP style or for APA or any of that or EL. I said EL. It's ELA. I'm not doing any of that. I'm writing for myself, but I still need to know what I'm referencing. Gavin has a terrible, terrible habit of closing off quotes when they shouldn't be closed off and citing them wrong. Like just getting the wrong page number, getting the wrong spot, having things be run-on sentences, having sentences cut off early and make it look like that's the end of a quote. He does this a lot. And it's one of the things that made me lose some respect for him. Don't get me wrong, I still respect him a lot, but my estimation of him and his abilities has gone down because of this problem. I want to be fair. I have a problem with the way that Heschmeyer does research. He does incomplete research. He goes 1 or 2 levels deep, every once in a while 3. He doesn't go any further than that. Now, I'm sure that now that Trent Horn and him are doing this like extended Catholic Answers Network thing where it's no longer their own show, but it's their show sponsored by Catholic Answers, I'm sure they have researchers now. I'm sure that's going to improve. But when they were doing it on their own, of the big Catholic apologists, Heschmeyer was one of the worst when it comes to bias. Okay? And so the moment that he would hit confirmation bias, he would stop or sometimes just go one layer deeper. He wouldn't exhaust his sources on his research. He's trying to bang out a video. He's trying to get to his point. And once he gets the proof that he's looking for, he stops. He doesn't re-verify or cross-verify or look for counterfactuals. He doesn't do any of that stuff. At least not the way that he presents his information. And I've seen that a lot, especially when it comes to his argumentation concerning purgatory. And I'm worried that when I read Pope Peter, I'm going to run into that a lot. And I'm someone who believes in the Pope. So, I don't want him to do bad research. And I fear that that's going to be what's going to happen, because every time that I watch one of his videos, there's at least 1 or 2 quotes that he could have gone further on, much deeper into, to find out if the quote that they were quoting, that he's quoting, is original or correct in its interpretation. It's quotes within quotes within quotes, and sometimes he just doesn't check to see what the original source said. He stops at the reference. I say that, but really I'm just criticizing Gavin here.
And I want to be clear, I'm not saying he did this on purpose. This happens easily enough accidentally, but it's important to know there has been a really important alteration here. When you go back and read, you'll see that it's only part of a sentence that goes on to say that bishops and deacons render to you the service of prophets and teachers. And then the next sentence says, despise them not therefore, for they are your honored ones together with the prophets and teachers. So in the unaltered version of the passage Gavin cites, 4 roles are mentioned, not 2. Bishops, deacons, prophets, and teachers. Somehow those last 2 got deleted in Gavin's version, and the comma was replaced with a period. So it lets him say that the Didache teaches that there's only those 2, bishops and deacons. But the evidence really does say otherwise. The other first century text Gavin cites is 1 Clement, which is typically dated to the year 96. He claims,
if you just read Clement's letter, it strongly confirms the claim that the apostles supported 2 offices in the church. That is what he plainly says, and he regards bishops and deacons, 2 offices, as the fulfillment of prophecy. And he uses the term bishop and presbyter interchangeably. And on multiple occasions, he always refers to the leadership.
I really wasn't trying to listen to Gavin's point here, but this just goes to my part about reading comprehension. I don't understand the terrible reading comprehension here. If I have a family of 5 and I only mention my wife and my son, that doesn't mean my daughters simply cease to exist. If I have, 6 pets and I mention 4 of them or 2 of them, that doesn't mean my other pets cease to exist. It's like that game that the kids play where you're like, I disappeared, I'm back, I disappeared, I'm back. It's like he doesn't have any perception of what's left behind when he covers his eyes. It's really bizarre. He's a grown man with a PhD. I don't get what's going on there.
When you read it in context, or even just read the 2 preceding paragraphs, I think a very different picture emerges. Now, to zoom out a little bit, the Christians of Corinth are dealing with an internal schism where some of the members of the church don't want to obey the presbyters, the elders. And so they write to the Church of Rome, which I think is telling of itself, and Clement writes back, denouncing their disobedience as a shameful and detestable sedition, utterly abhorrent to the elect of God. And he says in chapter 40 that when we look into the depths of the divine knowledge, it behooves us to do all things in order, which the Lord has commanded us to perform at stated times. So notice that he's talking here about us, how there's a divinely ordained order to the church. He then connects this order to the threefold order of the Jewish priesthood. First, he does this by talking about the need for sacrifices to be done in the proper order, and how those who present their offerings at the appointed time are accepted and blessed. And then he says, for his own peculiar services are assigned to the high priest, and their own proper places prescribed to the priests, and their own special administrations devolve on the Levites. The layman is bound by the laws that pertain to laymen. Let every one of you, brethren, give thanks to God in his own order, living in all good conscience with becoming gravity, and not going beyond the rules of the ministry prescribed to him. So when Clement is talking about the high priest, priest, and Levite, he's not literally suggesting we need to go back to animal sacrifices in the temple. Rather, as Lutheran scholars like Joel Olowski acknowledge, Clement is using the image of high priest, priest, Levite, and that threefold structure in the Old Testament to tell us something about the threefold structure of the New Testament church. This agrees with what we know from ancient liturgical texts. For instance, the oldest ordination rites we have are from what's called the apostolic tradition, which is generally agreed to be the work of St. Hippolytus in the early 200s. There's some scholarly...
Like I said, there's a chance here that now that Catholic Answers is backing up his private channel, research is going to be better. I don't know.
Debate. We don't need to get into all the weeds there. But in any case, these ancient prayers describe how the bishop is to exercise high priesthood for thee without rebuke. And we find similar prayers in many of the ancient rites for the ordination of bishops. So did he suddenly change his mind a paragraph later when he says that the apostles appointed the first fruits to be bishops and deacons of those who should afterwards believe? I don't think so. In the Bible, even though Israel had a 3-tiered structure, high priest, priest, Levite, it was often referred to by the shorthand priests and Levites. But we know that the high priesthood was actually something distinct. For instance, only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. Now, even today, you'll similarly find Catholics reference to clergy as priests.
And I was mentioned this in my last video commenting on this, which is Gavin seems to be confused about the roles that a bishop might play and what a bishop is. Bishop is a priest. You can refer to them as priest. You can refer to the Pope as a priest because the Pope is a bishop. And it's like the different roles, the different hats that the Bishop of Rome might wear as priest, as political figure, political head of the city, all these different roles. It's like Gavin doesn't understand that they're different roles within a single position, and that the end of all these are different. So you have the mission of a priest is slightly different than the mission of a bishop, and the mission of a bishop is slightly different than the mission of a cardinal, and a cardinal slightly different than the mission of a pope. And the Pope is all those things. Pope is also a bishop. Pope is also, a sovereign. Pope is also head of a church, head of a parish church. So he's got different things, pastoral care, different things that he's got to do. And different roles require different degrees of authority. And it's not as if he loses one degree of authority because he's doing one of his other roles. I use the example of being a husband and being an employee. If I was to act like a husband at work, I'd be in a lot of trouble. If I was to act like an employee at home, it wouldn't go well. So there's some type of confusion in the Protestant mind where something is not explicit, somehow it can't be true. And I don't get it. I think this is why a lot of people leave Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, it's because they think that they're irrational or unintelligent, and they're not. But in their explanations, there's these like blocks in their mind that keeps them from stating the obvious.
And deacons, even Catholic Answers has material in which we do so. That doesn't mean we don't believe in bishops, and it doesn't mean we think there are literally only 2 tiers to holy orders. By far, the clearest early source on what the structure of the early church looked like is St. Ignatius, the Bishop of Antioch. Now, he wrote about the year 107 en route to his martyrdom, and I think it's fair to say that Ignatius completely obliterates the idea that the early Christians had 2-tiered churches. You will find people, even scholars, who claim that Ignatius calls for the appointing of a single bishop in every church. But this is simply untrue. He doesn't propose anything. Instead, he writes to Christians that he knows already have a 3-tiered structure of governance in their local church. For instance, in his letter to the Magnesians, we even know the leaders' names. He greets Damas, your most worthy bishop. He greets your worthy presbyters Bassus and Apollonius, and he greets my fellow servant, the deacon Sodio. He praises the Ephesians because their justly renowned presbytery, worthy of God, is fitted as exactly to the bishop as the strings are to the harp, so that in your concord and harmonious love, Jesus Christ is sung. And again, we know who the bishop was. It was Onesimus, a man of inexpressible love and your bishop in the flesh. By the way, this is probably the same Onesimus who St. Paul wrote in defense of in his epistle to Philemon. So even when we don't know the exact names of the clergy, we do know that Ignatius had passed through this region on his way to Rome, seems to have known the people of these churches personally, and it's very clear they have a 3-tiered structure of governance. For instance, he mentions that 3-tiered structure of the church in his letter to the Smyrnians, and their bishop is Ignatius's old friend Polycarp. And he also writes to Polycarp personally, reiterating in that letter his call for the flock to be submissive to the bishop, to the presbyters, and to the deacons. Now this matters because Gavin has previously claimed that Bishop Polycarp supports the idea that the church didn't have bishops, it only had deacons and presbyters.
You've got other documents from the early 2nd century that seem to function just like the 1st century, where you've got Polycarp's epistle to the Philippians, chapters 5 and 6. It's just like 1 Timothy 3. You've got 2 offices, qualifications for deacons, qualifications for presbyters.
So Gavin appears to be claiming that Polycarp believed there are just 2 tiers to church governance, presbyters and deacons. I'm sure he can clarify if I'm misunderstanding him there. But if Polycarp's friend Ignatius can be trusted, we know it's not true. We know Polycarp himself is bishop. And
So this video by, I already pre-watched it. This video by Heschmeyer is great. It's great. It makes all the points that I made in my video, but it makes it a little bit more elegantly and ties them together a little bit more carefully. I think it's a good video to watch. We're going to move on to Trent Horn. Please watch Shameless Popery. Please watch Joe. Please subscribe to him. Ignore the fact that he has angry face. And let's go. You know what, Joe? I'm gonna give you a like, Joe. There you go. Remember that the next time I talk badly about one of your conclusions.
Problem of reconciling that with. Before we do that, I'd like to thank Gavin for reviewing the script for today's episode, because these kinds of
It's a weird move. It's a weird power move.
reviews help us
Dawn of all apologists.
to create better arguments, because we then clearly understand the person who's being critiqued. I'd also like to thank our supporters at TrentHornPodcast.com who make the Council of Trent possible. If you appreciate our content, then please consider supporting us for as little as $5 a month or $50 a year. And of course, liking this episode and subscribing to the channel are always appreciated. All right, so let's look at some of Gavin's arguments, but first, a disclaimer. The papacy is an interesting topic to debate because it deals with the question of what offices Christ instituted in his church, and there's a wide variance in the common ground that a Catholic might have with a critic of the papacy. For example, Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox agree bishops and patriarchs have sacerdotal apostolic authority. Where we disagree is on aspects of the Pope's jurisdictional power and his infallibility. The Orthodox are even willing to say that the Pope is a first among equals, kind of like how Anglicans view the Archbishop of Canterbury, except the Pope is not a lady. Anglicans and many Lutherans and some Methodists would agree that Christ gave us bishops along with pastors and deacons. They just disagree over the idea that one bishop has greater authority than the other bishops. Other Protestants would say the church is not governed by bishops at all, but by general presbyteral councils, or even that each congregation governs itself independently.
Again, I'm going to cover all of this in my upcoming video on the Bishop of Canterbury and the implications for the Catholic Church for there now being a female bishop in a traditional high church.
So to convince many Protestants of the papacy, you'd have to show that sola scriptura is false, since the Pope and the bishops united with him can teach infallibly, and that God gave us the office of bishop. And finally, that bishops do not all have equal authority in the church. Given this difficulty, I'm going to propose 2 simple approaches in response to Gavin's arguments and ask Protestants to compare their cases to their own positions on the offices in the church. In a previous episode, which I'll link to below, I discussed the fallacy of you lose, so I win. This happens when atheists, for example, think that they can prove atheism by simply saying the arguments for God aren't convincing enough. But that doesn't work because even if that were true, atheists still have to carry their own burden of proof. Something similar happens when Protestants and Catholics debate theology.
I kind of feel like he's uglying himself up and trying to get some gray hair.
Protestants will say that because Catholic arguments don't has its own doctrines, it must also approve. And by the way, I'm not saying Protestants are just like atheists or trying to impugn their character. I'm just making an analogy with another theological debate in order to provide clarity. Now, when discussing this episode with Gavin, he was concerned that in comparing Protestantism and Catholicism, I'd be making a fallacious apples to oranges comparison because the papacy is an office in the...
Another problem with this power move of having your opponents look through your scripts before you comment on them is that A, gives you an upper hand because now you know their arguments, and B, it puts them in a position that I don't think is repeatable. For instance, if I wanted to debate something about Gavin Ortlund did and I want to make a video of it, I can't send him my script for him to review it. He won't take the time to do that. There's too many. You know what I mean? So there's something uncouth about the way that this is going on.
Church, whereas the canon of Scripture is a concept. The problem with keeping the discussion strictly related to ecclesial offices is that Catholics agree that the evidence supports the existence of the other offices many Protestants accept, like bishops, priests and pastors, and deacons. If anything, Anglicans and other high church Protestants should be wary about how arguments like Gavin's against a supreme bishop of Rome are often used against the office of bishop itself. So that should make them rethink some of these arguments when they end up being used against the papacy. However, the true apples to...
That's honestly part of the problem that I have with Gavin's argument here is that he's arguing against his own position as a Christian. It seems unwise.
Apples comparison would be, especially for Protestants like Gavin, to show that the Bible and early church history show that the church only has pastors and deacons, or that it only had a congregational form of leadership where the church's own members...
Yeah, but going back to Canterbury, the Bible shows a female diaconate. I've heard you and Jimmy try to spin it, but it's there. So, if you're going to warn Gavin, I'm going to warn you. These arguments that you're making can be used against you.
Members are the highest authority. So we can make our own argument from silence against this claim, because nowhere in church history do we find early Christians saying that the office of bishop or the office of the pope represents a heretical innovation. Here's my colleague Joe Heschmeyer making this point in his response to Gavin.
If you think that Jesus did create some kind of structure of governance, if he did give some instructions to the apostles, you can imagine how people would freak out if somebody else came along and usurped that structure. For instance, if there were elders governing all the local churches, and suddenly one guy comes along and says, no, we don't need you anymore, it's just going to be me leading from now on, how likely is it that those other elders are going to take that kind of demotion without objecting? And particularly, if this new bishop is replacing the structure of the church that Jesus Christ founded, wouldn't everybody be upset about that? But as Leon Morris points out in the Evangelical Dictionary of Theology, we don't find any kind of freak out at all. In his words, nowhere is there evidence of a violent struggle, as would be natural if a divinely ordained Congregationalism or Presbyterianism were overthrown. The same threefold ministry is seen as universal throughout the early church as soon as there is sufficient evidence to show us the nature of the ministry. In fact, not only is there not a violent struggle, scholars have found no trace whatsoever of any churches going from a Presbyterian or a congregational structure to a church governed by a single bishop. In fact, we've seen several claims from church fathers where they make it very clear that they don't believe they have the right to change the structure of government because it was given to them by Christ through the apostles.
So that's one way to subject Protestantism to the same critique the Catholic ecclesial model is being subjected to. However, to make my point and address Gavin's concern, I'm going to ask in this episode a smaller question and a bigger question when comparing evidence for Catholicism and Protestantism. So back to my original analogy. Sometimes atheists will say, so what if you have evidence that there is a designer or necessary cause of the universe? You still haven't proved it is your omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent God. To which a Christian might say, well, what makes better sense of the data we do observe? A supreme being or the non-existence of a supreme being? In doing...
All right, we're done. Okay, let's go over here. All right. Woo. Okay. This was good. This was fun, everybody. Take 20. Good night.
Hey man, listen up closely. I know lately you're a bit lonely. Did you know on your phone there's a whole world full of girls you could be looking at, homie? It's true, between me and you, it's only $5 and watch what they do. Let's get high, lose track of time. Come on man, you know I'm a damn good time. Yo, if they're gonna post it, no clothing, oh my god, so exposed and everything. You might as well see everything, every inch, never leave or grow a need. Wait, maybe you should DM, be friends, pretend, a boyfriend, the deep end. She needs men, she needs you and your twos. Get out of my head, get out of my mind. I need to focus, I'm wasting my time. You make me feel hopeless, I'm wasting my prime. Fuck it, I'm going to war with my mind. I'm in control, my body and soul. Never again will you ever take hold. I've got a purpose outside of this hole, and I'll turn this feeling into something more. I can change, rearrange my brain. Thoughts and energy push through pain. Loneliness is a passing phase. A better life, it starts today. Once hopeless and broken, I'm in motion. Just gotta stay focused. Keep moving, keep growing. Never look back, got a new path chosen.
When we are weak, when we are broken, often we're left open in darkness. All of our flaws that keep us hopeless, numb our minds and choke us.